Hi. So many children these days seem to struggle with reading. And from what I can see, parents are very confused about what's causing the problem and what to do about it. There's been all sorts of theories, but what if we've misunderstood the real cause of children struggling with reading? And what if it could be that we could tackle that root cause before we go to the trouble of diagnosing them and labeling with all sorts of labels? Because in my view, labels don't help. It kind of condemns children to a virtual scrap heap. They're not bright, there's nothing we can do about it, we'll try a bit, but we're not going to get very far. What if this whole approach is so wrong? Well, my name's Winford Dorr, and I've been studying the brain and how it affects children's ability to learn and develop basic skills for many years now. And what I've come to the conclusion of is that poor reading is absolutely not connected with their level of intelligence, and it's often the opposite. So what is the root cause? If it's not intelligent, it's an increasing problem. The government spends huge amounts of money on phonics and all sorts of things. They clearly aren't getting to the root cause because the problem is getting worse. Children are struggling, and they become adults and they struggle. They have to learn coping strategies the whole of their lives. Well, what I've learned is that for the vast majority of children with reading issues, their problem is eye tracking. Their eyes do not smoothly track the words when they try and read. It's as simple as that. So you say, what causes that? Well, the cause is actually in the bit of the brain that develops all of our basic skills. So those same children that struggle with reading, very often they hold their pen in a strange way and they find writing hard, and their writing is often very poor. Many of those children also find spelling difficult too, because sometimes they see the letters in reverse order, sometimes they miss out letters completely, sometimes when they're reading they skip words or even skip lines. I was talking to a mum of an 8-year-old recently who'd actually gone through this whole process. He had failed to read completely. So he started the program that I've been working on for some time, and within weeks he was reading. In fact, he went off to a library and got a big fat book and read 300 pages. At 8, yes. Someone that hadn't read before was written off already by his teachers because they didn't know what to do. So starting from this belief that the root cause might be eye tracking is well worth having a look. So this little lad, he used to try and use his finger or a ruler to read. It didn't help. But what he was trying to do was overcome the fact that his eyes wouldn't track. So why wouldn't they track? Well, if the bit of the back of the brain that develops skills, it's actually called by some neuroscientists the brain within the brain. If that bit is itself not doing its job, then simple everyday things like moving your eyes smoothly so you take in the words will not be happening. So that's why this little lad was using his finger or sometimes a ruler to try and cope for that. His eyes were jumping, and when his mum put her finger up in front of his eyes and said, "Follow my finger," first of all he moved his head, because it wasn't easy for him to move his eyes smoothly. When she made his head stay still, and she did that, his eyes were jumping all over the place. You could see it. They were up and down and left and right. So when he was reading, the poor little guy was taking in letters in the wrong order. Some were going in back to front because his eyes were going the wrong way as he was trying to read. And so what happens? In the brain, when you get that jumbled information, his working memory, that's the bit of his brain that he can use and access and do things with, that was full of trying to unscramble the letters. A really, really hard process. It was also full trying to control his eyes. So when the poor guy eventually worked out what a word was, and it was really hard work for him, he'd got nowhere to store that word because the only place to store it is your working memory, and that was full of carrying out lots of other processes that really shouldn't be there if his eye tracking had developed normally. So when he tried to read, he'd read a word and work out what it was, and he'd get to the next word and he'd work very, very hard and eventually work out that was, and he'd get to the end of the sentence after a long time. And guess what? He'd had nowhere in his brain to store all those words, because his working memory was so full, carrying out all sorts of other processes. So he started the sentence again, and he'd get to the end of the paragraph and he'd start the paragraph again, and his eyes were working so hard, his eyes would be streaming, and he'd be tired just after a few minutes reading. Poor little guy. Well, you'd be pleased to know that when we tackled what I believe is the root cause and developed the cerebellum then naturally and completely developed his eye tracking, so it became a natural skill for him. And when he tries to read now, his eyes track smoothly, so the letters go in the right order. So his thinking brain isn't full of moving his eyes for him. He's now got an automatic program that he doesn't have to think about to do that. He doesn't have to unscramble the letters, so he's got lots of space, and so he can now read, remember and comprehend the whole thing. Now, it's very interesting. Often children, sometimes they get a reasonable one-word reading score at school, but they have low comprehension scores. Well, what I've just explained actually explains the answer to that. They can read single words, they've got no place to store it, so they have good single word reading and poor comprehension. So the answer, the root cause, I believe, for the vast majority of children with poor reading is in the cerebellum. Now, there's one exception to that. I must mention it because probably about 1 in 15, 1 in 20 children actually have such exceptional visual processing, even though their eyes track poorly, they have a photographic memory, so they can remember word, word, word. Often their spelling can sometimes be very poor unless their photographic memory is exceptional. So it is possible for children with some conditions to overcome this, but it's rare. And it's a condition you must tackle, because children become adults and go right through life with this issue, and it hampers them in every aspect of your life. So if you suspect that your child is struggling with reading for whatever reason, go to the link above or below this video to where it says test your child's brain, because there is now something that you can do, and I wish you well in doing it.